What's going on, guys? Sam Wicker here from So Crazy Media, and this is part 2 of the wall break tutorial that I introduced in last week's tutorial. So this time around we're going to go ahead and add FumeFX smoke, which is going to actually look like dust. It's going to replicate dust. FumeFX dust to our simulation to add a lot of debris and just a lot more realism to this wall explosion. So we got to get started because this is going to be a long tutorial. Okay, so let's just go ahead and press P and get out of the camera view and into our perspective view, and we have all of our fragments, and what we need to do is create a particle system to base our FumeFX simulation off of, and the particles need to be emitting from these fragments. So to do that, we're just going to go ahead and click Standard Primitives, Particle Systems, PF Source, and let's just drag this out in an open area. So now we scrub through and we can see we have all these particles being emitted, but we need them to emit from our fragments. So what we're going to do is we're going to press 6. This will open up the particle view, and we can go ahead and delete shape, we can delete rotation, and we can turn off speed. And let's go ahead and drag out position object. This is going to allow us to emit our particles from objects in our scene. So we're going to select add, and we're just going to do a test. So we added that one fragment. Now when we scrub through, check that out. That's exactly what we want. But they're not moving, so let's change that. We'll click Inherit Emitter, and now it takes information based off the object's animation. And we'll change to about 50%. It's looking great. All right, so we've got it all set up, but the only problem is we need to select all of our particles. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to create a selection set. It's right up here. What we're going to do is we're going to first delete that emitter object, and we're just going to go ahead and orient ourselves to the top, come to the end of the simulation where all of our fragments that are main parts of this explosion are resting on that plane, and let's just drag out and select them all. And there's one little outlier over there. So we selected all of them, and then we're also going to press Control and select the ones in the back as well. All right. So then we'll press Alt and deselect our camera and our plane that got selected, and we can scrub through and check that out. We've got all of the main core components of our explosion selected, and we're going to create a selection set out of them now. It looks like there's one missing right there. All right, so we're going to create a selection set of them now. So we're going to go up here, and we're just going to type rocks. Press Enter, and now let's just go ahead and press 6 again, and add by list, and now we can add that selection set and press select. So now all of those fragments are in here. So now what we need to do is we need to amp up the amount of particles that are being emitted, because that is just not enough. So we'll go to the birth, and we'll first of all set our emit start to frame 5, because that's when the explosion happens, and we're going to change our amount from 200 to 20,000. Alright, so check that out. That's very chaotic. It's the right amount of particles, but they just go on for forever. They need to die. So we're going to add a delete modifier as well. And we're going to delete by particle age, lifespan of 10, and variation of 5. Alright. Now, I'm on a laptop, so this is a little chaotic to work with, and I don't want it to bog down the tutorial. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and go to our render, and under... Actually, I'm going to go to our display, sorry. And I'm going to change our display to about 10%. So now we only see 10% of the particles of the 20,000. Okay, so we've got our particles set up. We can close out of this particle view, and it's looking awesome. But let's go ahead and move on to the FumeFX portion of the tutorial, where we're going to actually put FumeFX smoke, which is going to look like the dust, on these particles. So to do this, we need to go into our helpers. We're going to go down to FumeFX, and we're going to add a particle source. Drag that out, and we're going to pick our PF source. Alright. So now if we come in here, we can see that we have all these little circles around our particles. And that's the radius. So we're going to change that radius to be a little bit bigger so they start to overlap. We'll put 6.5. Alright, that's looking great. And then we're also going to turn on this particle radius. And we're going to change the amount to the right of it to 0. So now if you watch it back, they slowly die out. Alright, so now we have all of that set up, What we need to do now is create our container for FumeFX to create its simulation within. So we'll go to our geometry, and we'll go to our FumeFX, click the FumeFX box, and then drag it out into our scene, right over where the simulation is supposed to occur. Alright, it's looking great. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and go into the properties, or open up the UI for FumeFX, and here's where all of the FumeFX settings take place. I know it may look a little ridiculous, may look like a lot of stuff's cluttered up, but when you break down section by section, it's really easy and it's amazing what you can do with FumeFX. It truly is. So we're going to go ahead and go to Object Source, and we just need to add our helper to our FumeFX grid. So we're going to click Pick Object, and we're going to click the source. And now let's just go ahead and turn off our fire, because we're not rendering fire, we're just rendering smoke, which is going to look like the dust for our simulation. We'll also turn off Simulate Fuel. And the next thing we're going to do before we do any simulations is change our path for our simulation. So just add it to a scratch disk drive, something with a lot of space so you can work off of. And we'll also save out a wavelet path for it, because wavelet will allow you to double the resolution effectively, and I've talked about this before in the gunshot smoke tutorial, but I'll also run through it at the end of this one. I'm just going to run through a couple of the settings that we should set up first to start off the first simulation. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lower the spacing, and this is the resolution. So I don't want it to go too overboard, but I want to be able to have some detail in the simulation. Now under the simulation tab, I'll change the maximum iterations to 50 for the time being. And I'm going to change our X turbulence to 0.3, our scale to 10, and I'm going to go down here to our temperature buoyancy, and this just affects how everything rises, and I'm just going to change it to 0.15. So now let's head over to the render tab, and and though we don't have a light in here, let's just go ahead and turn on cast shadows and receive shadows, and we'll change the color to keyless mode, and we'll give it a dusty color. Looks like debris. So brown, just give it a tannish color and just desaturate it. Alright. And then we'll also disable this and turn the opacity to 0.2. So let's go ahead and run a quick test simulation. Alright, so I stopped it a little early for you to take a look. You can see we're cutting off a little bit of the simulation, but that's alright. This is just a test. For you guys, you'll want to extend the box out so you get more of the information. But it's looking awesome. One thing I did do in Chalk Warfare 3 was I went over here to the object space warps, and I added in some of the larger particles to affect the simulation. So this just stirred around some of the dust when they came through. And I didn't add all particles because that just would have overwhelmed the simulation. But if you add some of the main explosion fragments, it really does make it look a lot better. So now one last thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create our light for FumeFX. So we'll just come back out here, press Alt-W, that'll bring us out of the maximized view. And I already currently do have a light set up. This is just a Vray sun. I render everything out in Vray, but then when I do FumeFX, I render everything out in scanline, because you don't need GI rendering for FumeFX. And there will be a separate tutorial, probably a link in the description or a link shown up right now, that'll be its own independent tutorial on my render passes for FumeFX and for Vray, so be sure to check those out. But I'm just going to run through it very quickly right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a light, and it has to be a standard light for it to work with FumeFX. And I'm just going to create a target direct light, and I'm just going to make it parallel to this other lighting setup I had. And then I'm going to turn the shadows on, and I'm going to go over to the directional parameters and just bring that hotspot all the way up to cover our entire area. And then under shadow parameters, make sure you have atmosphere shadows on. That's very important. It allows FumeFX to actually have shadows. So now we'll come out of the maximize viewport. We'll press C to go to our camera view. Alt-W maximizes it. We'll click the FumeFX tab. And we need to add our light into our scene. And click our light, add it in the scene, and then we'll go back now so you can see there's shadows on our dust. It looks really sweet when you get the shadows in there. So we'll bring that back down, and that's the basic gist of the dust. Now to effectively get the wavelet turbulence simulation, what you want to do is you want to turn on wavelet turbulence down at the bottom and extra detail. And now we're going to set our spacing up for our final simulation, and we'll change it to something with great detail, not that high. We'll try 1, and just you can come over to the wavelet and see how that affects it. That looks great for a simulation. What we can do is we can simulate this out, and then once that simulation's done, we'll change our sim mode to wavelet, and then run a wavelet pass, and then you can have effectively double the simulation grid scale. So then once that simulation is all said and done, it's time for rendering. So now for rendering, when I have a scene with FumeFX and just geometry that I need to render out, I render out just the geometry with Vray, and I render out all the FumeFX stuff with Scanline. So I have everything set up right now for Vray. So what I would do is I'll come in here and I'll turn off all of my data for the FusionWorks renderer, which is the FumeFX, and I'll turn off that light that we set up for the time being, just to render out our geometry, and I can lower the resolution to show you. So here's all the geometry we had set up. So now, once I have that rendered out and that image saved, I'm going to exit out, and now I'm going to render out the FumeFX pass. So I'm going to go over to the Assign Renderer, and I'll turn my V-Ray sun off that I had turned on, and then turn the light back on for FumeFX. Go back into the Environment tab, turn back on FumeFX, and then I'll also turn off the exposure control that I had set up for V-Ray. And also be sure to turn off the environment map that I had set up. Then I can go in the material editor, just create a new material, and I'm going to create a matte shadow material. And I'm going to apply this matte shadow material to every single element in the scene, so that when I render this out, I will have a perfect image to put directly over top of the geometry render. And then I'll check Apply Atmosphere, and then change to at Object Depth. And I'll apply this to every single asset in the scene. And click Assign. And I'll have to rename this. And then what I can do is I can press Render, and I can run through an entire pass with just the FumeFX. So now if we look at the alpha channel, we can see that this will fit perfectly on top of our original render with the geometry. Now I'm going to run through these passes more in depth in 2 separate tutorials, one for render passes with V-Ray and one for render passes with FumeFX. So don't worry if you didn't quite understand it, but if you did, I encourage you to test it out and download the project files I have available for download, because the next set of tutorials for this series will be part 3, and it will be on the compositing stage in Adobe After Effects. And you can download all of the project files that I have on our website at socrazymedia.com for this video, and you can check that out, link in the description, and also a annotation down below somewhere. So be sure to check that out. Thanks for listening, guys, and I really do appreciate you guys tuning in to watch this tutorial. I would like to start making these tutorials every week, and I'm thinking that Tuesday will be the best day to do it. So it looks like we're going to start doing tutorial Tuesdays. So until next time, guys, thanks.